Welcome to episode 11 of the podcast. I want to take a second today to thank another person who has rated and reviewed the show, Lauren Davis of Lauren Davis Creative. Her review is great stuff. Danny is skilled and great at strategizing in the podcast industry, and it's apparent in his podcast. Thanks, Lauren. And if you love the show, I would really appreciate it if you'd head over to Apple Podcasts or any app that you use to listen to podcasts and rate and review as well. So the first industry strategy that I want to cover for using a podcast is for the human resources industry. I want to tell you a story about Lee Cockrell. Lee Cockrell is the former executive vice president of operations for the Walt Disney World Resort. He stresses in his books and keynotes how important it is to communicate with employees and show appreciation for a job well done. As the senior operating executive for 10 years, Lee led a team of 40,000 cast members and was responsible for the operations of 20 resort hotels, 4 theme parks, 2 water parks, a shopping and entertainment village, and the ESPN Sports and Recreation Complex, in addition to the ancillary operations which supported the #1 vacation destination in the world. You can imagine that it was difficult for an executive responsible for that many employees and such a huge operation to stay connected with individual employees. Besides making a point of spending time walking the parks daily, Lee created the Main Street Diary, an employee newsletter that he used to build connections with cast members, enhance the Disney culture, and share cast member success stories. His son, Dan, who actually started right out of college parking cars in the Epcot parking lot, worked his way up to a frontline food and beverage manager at the Disneyland Resort Paris, and eventually served as vice president at Epcot, Disney Hollywood Studios, and then the Magic Kingdom, and he's just recently left that position. He continued his father's tradition of building connections with his cast members. Dan, however, did it with a podcast. Podcasting is mainstream. Now, and you've heard these stats before, but in 2017, 48 million Americans listened to podcasts weekly. 32% of those listeners were ages 25 to 54. The average listener subscribes to 6 shows. They consume 7 episodes a week, and 80% of them listen to more than half or all of each episode. And forward-thinking companies are using podcasts as a convenient way to connect with their employees. You can count Marriott, GEICO, and Johns Hopkins in this category of businesses using podcasts to communicate with their employees. Why does it work? Well, podcasts showcase authenticity and personality even better than other mediums like video and blogs. Podcasts allow you to get rid of those long emails and scripted speeches. You can just talk and let them hear the more personal side of you. Leaders and other key members of the staff, which end up being the podcast host, are in the ears of the listener a lot longer than someone who's in a video. They can hear your actual voice, right? Unlike a blog they decided to read. And you come across more real and authentic because there isn't fancy lighting and graphics like you'd have in a produced video. Podcasts can be consumed on the go, remember? No longer do you need to have as many boring meetings to communicate with all your employees. Your employees can listen in the car on the way to work. They can listen at the gym while they're walking, whenever they want. For many employees in a large company, leaders often seem like distant figures. The podcast allows them to connect with employees in a way that builds a personal bond and appreciation between the two. Think about it this way. If you were hanging out with someone at their house, in their car, at the gym, while walking around, how long do you think it would take you to build a real bond with them, to know, like, and trust them? I've said this before. Not long at all, right? And more importantly, they develop a deeper relationship with the company mission, story, goals, and culture. Now, how can you use a podcast in a company? Several hosting platforms like Libsyn, Podbean, and Blueberry, which I'll share the URLs in the show notes for you, offer enterprise podcast hosting solutions to allow you to securely provide your podcasts only to your employees. This allows you to include sensitive information in podcasts, things like messages from leaders, team meetings, important company announcements, organizational changes, HR announcements, employee orientation and onboarding, corporate earnings calls, Companies like Marriott are using podcasts for recruitment as a way to communicate information about the company that would be helpful to job seekers. It's a great way to use the authenticity of podcasting to your advantage early on because it builds trust with potential candidates before they even walk in the door for an interview. Bottom line is that podcasts can help you build connections, enhance culture, and strengthen bonds throughout your company. One of the most frequent questions I get about marketing is, how do we know what type of marketing to invest in? There is so much out there. How do we compete with all the marketing noise? Well, you know my answer is going to be you need a podcast. Well, here's a story that shows exactly what I do. I've told you about Katie Kermitsos and her podcast, Biz Women Rock, before on an earlier episode. Katie's a business strategist and coach, and she happens to be one of my clients as well. She's reached thousands of women business owners all across the country through her podcast. Because of her podcast, Katie is always talking to warm leads who want to listen and learn about what she has to offer them. Well, so how did I help her? I met Katie in December 2016 when I approached her about advertising my services on her show. As we developed the ads, she and I had several great discussions about podcasting and her show in particular. I discovered that even after over 250 episodes and building a thriving community in business, she was still spending 3 to 4 hours per week editing, uploading, promoting, and analyzing her podcast. She was tired of it, frustrated, and almost to the point of ditching the show entirely. I immediately suggested she have us take over all of her show production and distribution. This simple step immediately allowed her to implement changes that tripled her revenue in 2017 because she was able to focus on much higher value activities that would grow her business. It gave her real results because she was focused on doing the work that had the power to skyrocket her income. The mere fact that I helped her think about her podcast in a strategic manner added value. Much of what I do as a strategist is identify the gaps and call out the problems, and that is often enough. Most of the time, the people I work with are too close to their businesses to see how unproductive it is for them to keep doing this or that when they can have someone else do it for them. I also add value by helping them avoid the pitfalls, overcome the obstacles, and shorten the learning curve. I reveal examples of small things that can compromise their results. Most business owners know what they need. They just don't know how to get it, and more often than not, they are trying to do it all on their own. Believe it or not, most business owners don't even realize that a podcast can help them, and it takes a forward-thinking leader to take that first step. So if you're ready to take that first step, contact me today to schedule a free 15-minute strategy session, and let's get started crafting a podcast that will create customers who trust your business before they ever buy, and then can't wait to tell the world about you. You can schedule a time with me by going to meetme.so/Danny Osmond. That's meetme.so/Danny Osmond, and I'll include the URL in the show notes. Today's show was brought to you by ConvertKit, the only email marketing system you'll ever need. After 5 years with the email marketing provider that everyone starts out with, you know who I'm talking about, I was desperately searching for one that was simple, easy to manage, and affordable. ConvertKit easily stood out above the rest, and I've been ridiculously happy with them ever since I made the switch. Emailing my community and creating automation series for special resources has never been so simple. Whether you're ready to start your first email marketing setup or you're searching for a new provider, I highly recommend ConvertKit. Go check them out and other resources that I recommend at DannyOsmond.com/resources. That's DannyOsmond.com/resources.